Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Avery, and today I wanted to go through every single book that I read in 2024 and kind of talk about what I thought about them, if I recommend them, and that kind of stuff. I have them all here. I read 14 and a half kind of books this year. I'm not really sure if that's the exact amount because I only started keeping track like in February, so like there might be one or two books that I forgot about, but there's 14 and a half kind of books that I'll be talking about in this video. Okay, the first book is Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. Here she is, Fourth Wing. Okay, so this was a very popular book this year. This is a fantasy book, and I love fantasy books, and I really enjoyed this book. There were a lot of cool like fantasy elements, like the dragons and the dragons like connections to the characters. Like I was living for that. To be honest, thinking back on it, I don't fully remember the plot. I just remember that there was like a plot twist at the end, and that was like shocking, but I'm not fully comprehending the full plot. I do own the sequel. It's somewhere. Like, I have the sequel Iron Flame, but I haven't read it, and I'm not planning on reading it, to be honest, because I've heard that it was worse than the original or the first book, and I liked this book a lot. I think I gave it 4 stars, but I'm not fully sold on it, and if the second book is worse than this one, then I'm probably not going to enjoy it, so I'm probably not going to read it. I think the thing that really made me not enjoy this book as much as I would have were just the spicy scenes. Like, I'm not fully into that. I don't really care, to be honest. I know a lot of people do like that kind of element in books, and like, it may or may not have been one of the reasons it was so popular this year, but that's just like not for me. So if you're not a fan of that stuff, I don't recommend this book because there are some pretty graphic scenes. The overall premise and like the fantasy elements were really good, but I don't know, that part just kind of freaked me out a little bit, I'm not gonna lie, but overall I gave it 4 stars, so I did like it. So I do recommend it for fantasy lovers that don't mind spicy scenes. It's definitely a good read. And that's the first book I read this year. Okay, book number 2 is The Book Thief by Marcus Zusak. I don't know if I'm saying his name right, but here it is. Okay, so I'm not really sure how popular this book is. I'm sure you've seen it before if you're on like Book Talk or whatever, but I feel like it needs to be more popular because this book is so good. Like it's probably one of my favorites, if not my favorite book I've ever read. It's a historical fiction book that takes place in Germany during World War II, and it's really sad, but like in a good way. You know what I mean? It's like devastating, but also like thought-provoking. And my hot take on books is if it's sad, like it just makes it better. I don't know if you guys agree with me, but that's just like what I feel like. So this book being sad just like pushed it over the edge and made it like one of my favorite books ever. For me personally, this is a must read. If you've never read this book, please read it. It's so good. And I 100% recommend this book. So please read The Book Thief. It's so good. Okay, the second and a half book that I read this year is Powerless by Lauren Roberts. She's up here, not with the rest of the books, because this is the one I didn't finish, and I don't regret not finishing it. So, Powerless, as you can see, this is how far I got. I still have my bookmark in there. I wasn't sure if I was going to come back and retry to read it, but I don't know if I ever will. So basically, I had just finished reading The Book Thief, which was a 5-star book for me, so like it was pretty hard. It's pretty hard to top that. And then I started reading this book after, and I don't know if it was because I had just gotten done reading a 5-star book, so like I wasn't prepared maybe for like the different writing in this book, or I don't know. I don't know if it was like the different writing or like just like the concept, but I wasn't feeling this book. I know it's like really popular. You've probably heard of it, but it just felt like the plot had been done before. It was a little bit boring to me. I mean, I didn't get very far, so like if you love this book, like I'm not saying like, oh, like you shouldn't love this book. Like I didn't get very far, but like maybe I'll try to read it again, but for right now, I just wasn't feeling it, and yeah, I guess we'll see if I'll revisit it, because I might not, because I have so many other books that I can read. Like there's so many other books, so if I'm still not feeling it, I'm not going to force myself to read it. The third book I read this year was The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. So I don't own this book. I got it and read it for school. This is definitely the year that I like honed in on reading classics. Like I really want to read as many classics as possible, because like they're classics for a reason, you know? Well, the first one I read this year was The Great Gatsby. I did read it for school, but I also like really enjoyed it. In The Great Gatsby, there was lots of symbolism that like I had to like look up to fully comprehend and understand what was going on. But to be honest, I wouldn't expect anything less from a classic. And so that wasn't a like deal breaker for me. I still really enjoyed the book. Overall, it was really interesting and just like a good read. So I definitely recommend The Great Gatsby. Okay, the next book I read this year, number 4, was Dragon Fruit by Micaiah Lucier. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing these authors' names. I'm trying really hard. Here it is, Dragon Fruit. I actually really enjoyed this book. It was more of like an easy, fun read. It's a fantasy book, but it doesn't have that much like politics or stuff to like think about. It's more of just like a fantasy adventure. I really enjoyed this book. There were lots of lovable characters. It's a super cute book, and I recommend it for just an easy, fun fantasy read. And it's not too long, too. It's a good book. Okay, book number 5 is Percy Jackson and the Olympians, The Sea of Monsters by Rick Warden. This is the second book in the Percy Jackson series. I'm slowly but surely reading the Percy Jackson books. This year I read the second one, and I still haven't read the third one, but I will make it there, I promise. Basically, I'm reading Percy Jackson now because when I was younger, I was definitely fully a Harry Potter girl. So I never got into Percy Jackson, but a lot of people love Percy Jackson, so I gotta get into it too. I gotta know what they're talking about, you know? Plus, I love Greek mythology stuff. Like, I read The Song of Achilles and Circe, and I loved those, so I'm getting into these. It's definitely an easy read. It is aimed towards children, but anyone can read it. It has a lot of interesting lore, and it kind of puts a fun, like, interesting, quirky little twist on the classic, like, Greek mythology. So yeah, I recommend Percy Jackson and the Olympians, The Sea of Monsters. Okay, book number 6 is All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr. This is another historical fiction taking place in Paris and Germany in World War II. And this book is so good. It can be a little slow at parts, but it's definitely worth it. It has like hope in it, it has sadness, definitely sadness. But I'm telling you, that's what makes a good book great, in my opinion. And I definitely recommend this book. Okay, the next book I read this year, book number 7, is Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe by Benjamin Elias Sayens. Okay, so this book I don't own. I got it from the library. By the way, I definitely recommend getting books from your library. Just thought I'd mention it. Okay, so Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe. This is a really good coming-of-age book. I really like this book. It has a lot of like life lessons in it. I remember this book being pretty well-paced. Like I wasn't really bored throughout. It is a pretty easy read, but I feel like that is a bonus sometimes. It does have a sequel, but I haven't read it, and I'm not sure if I will read it because the ending of the first book, it feels good as it is. Like I don't feel like I need to continue their story, if you will. I know it does continue, but I feel like I'm happy just reading the first one. So I definitely recommend this book. Okay, book number 8 is To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. Another classic that I read this year, To Kill a Mockingbird. This book is definitely easier to read than some other classics, but it's still an amazing book. There's a lot of life lessons learned in this book that the characters learn. It honestly has a pretty interesting plot that like kept my attention while I was reading it. It's not very long, and I feel like if you're gonna read any classic, you should definitely read this one. This one's probably, and The Great Gatsby honestly, is probably one of the more well-known classics, but that's definitely for a reason. This book is so good. I definitely recommend. Okay, the next book, book number 9, is Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. Okay, I don't own this book. I got this one from the library, and this is yet another classic that I read this year. Okay, so basically this book felt like a fever dream. All I remember is that it was like super, super complex, like a lot of complex world building, and it was honestly like crazy. It was a good book though, and definitely an interesting read. It was harder to understand just because of the writing and also the world building and this like the crazy detail that was going into that. But still, I definitely recommend this book. Okay, book number 10 is The 7-Year Slip by Ashley Poston. The 7-Year Slip is a romance book. Now, I don't read romance. I don't like romance books. I only enjoy romance when it's in some sort of fantasy book with like other stuff going on, because when it's just romance, it's kind of boring to me. So this is the first romance book I've ever read, and I got it recommended to me from like some YouTube video, I don't know. The only reason I got it and I read it was because there's like a tiny element of magic in it, and I just thought it like made for an interesting plot. But to be honest, it wasn't just the element of magic that like made this book enjoyable for me, because I really did enjoy this book. I was also kind of rooting for the couple, which I was really surprised when I was reading it that I was like enjoying the romance aspect of it, but I'm not gonna lie, I did. I thought it was cute. For sure, recommend The 7-Year Slip to all of you romance lovers. And all of you not romance lovers, because I enjoyed it, maybe you will too. Okay, now we're kind of getting to the books where like I actually kind of have memory reading, because I feel like all of the past books like I don't fully comprehend like what happened, but like I just know how I felt about it, if you know what I mean. But these ones like I actually remember reading, actually remember what I was thinking like when stuff was happening. Okay, book 11 is Vicious by V.E. Schwab. This book I have had oh my god. This book I have had on my shelf for probably like a full year. I think I got it last Christmas and I only read it like 2 months ago maybe. But I totally regret putting it off so long because it is such a good book. It has a super, super interesting plot about like these two college boys discovering people can get extraordinary powers, kind of doing like a research project on it, but then all of a sudden it gets a little too real. I haven't read the sequel, I don't own it, but I definitely want to read the sequel because I feel like it'd be interesting. And it kind of left off on a cliffhanger, not really, but there's definitely room for more expansion in the story, the world, kind of the concept of the extraordinary powers. So I definitely do want to read the sequel, and I definitely, definitely recommend this book, Vicious by V.E. Schwab. So good. Okay, book number 12 is Slewfoot by Brahm. This book, you guys. It's a little bit horrifying, but I love it. So I read this book around Halloween, which was a very good choice that I made because it is definitely a Halloween, a spooky, a scary book. Basically, it's about kind of like witch trials, the devil, kind of like all of this spooky, scary stuff. It's a super, super interesting story. Like, I was always on the edge of my seat, I felt like. And again, I read it during Halloween, so it's like the perfect vibe. And I love Halloween, so like this book is right up my alley. And also inside, they're like super, super pretty, beautiful illustrations of like the characters, kind of like this. But like I'm not going to spoil it for you. If you want to look it up, you can. If you want to buy the book, you can. If you want to whatever. I'm not going to spoil the illustrations for you, but it's kind of similar to this. Like it's illustrations of like each of the characters because it is kind of historical fiction fantasy, so like there are some elements that are like kind of hard to imagine, but they're in the book, so it's so good. This book did get a little gruesome at parts. Like a lot of the gore was really like explained, it very detailed. I don't mind that kind of stuff, but if you do, I don't know if this would be a book for you. But in my opinion, I definitely, definitely recommend this book. And I recommend that you read it around Halloween time. Book number 13 is 1984 by George Orwell. 1984, you already know it. I read it for school. I feel like this is like the classic of all classics. As you can see, I definitely did it for class because I have a lot of bookmarks in there, a lot of notes I took. I'm sure you've heard of like the overall plot of 1984 because it's a super popular classic, and the concept of it is super, super interesting, and like the world building and the just the detail that went into creating this world that George Orwell did. Like literally he wrote at the end, it's the principles of newspeak. It literally is like an academic essay about the language that he invented for this book, Newspeak. Like, it's so interesting. There's so much detail that goes into it. In the actual reading of this book, there are definitely some parts that just kind of drag on, some parts that are a little boring. But overall, this book is super interesting, and if you haven't read it before, you should definitely read it. Number 14, the last book I read, Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. I love fantasy. I love fantasy books. So, Throne of Glass is a long series. I can't even remember how many books are in it. So I have been putting reading this book off for probably a year now because I just didn't want to have to get into the full series. So I finally gave it a go, and I'm so glad I did because I actually loved this book. It's a super great fantasy book. It definitely sets up for like a lot of things to be uncovered in later books. When I first started reading this book, it felt like a lot of other YA fantasy books, but as I continued reading it, I kind of steered away from that and had a lot of new, like, fresh, interesting concepts. I really, really love this book. I'm already on to the second one in the series, which is called Crown of Midnight. But anyway, I definitely recommend this book for all the fantasy lovers out there. Okay, and those are all the books that I read this year. Okay, so throughout the video, I organized the books into a definitely recommend, and then like a not recommend or like unfinished category. So those are the categories. Those are all the books in the categories. And overall, this year, my favorite book that I read is The Book Thief. That is my favorite book. I'm serious, you guys need to get into this book. It is so good. It is so devastating. Like, it is seriously so good. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you guys enjoyed me talking about all of the books I read this year. If you guys have any book recommendations that you think I should read, definitely put them in the comments below. Also put what books you read this year because I'm interested to know what other people are reading. Again, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Bye!